De donde vengas, gózala como quieras. Baila la salsa, bailala a tu manera. Te entra por los pies, te sale por la azotea.
After 30 years of the same representation, San Francisco deserves a champion willing to return our city to the front lines of the progressive movement. Our city stands for inclusion and pride, peace and justice, and environmental sustainability. We can't wait another 30 years for our leaders to evolve on climate change. Delay is no better than denial. The time for action was yesterday.
Hi, everyone. Shahid Buttar here in San Francisco. I'm so glad that you've joined us this evening. I'm excited for the latest in our series of live streams. Tonight, we're going to be joined by a longtime friend, ally, and colleague of mine, Linda Sarsour. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Just to give you a quick recap of what we'll cover over the next hour or so together, I want to first dive into some local events as it relates to the coronavirus response and some issues that it has raised here in San Francisco. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some campaign updates and some news from our campaign about some exciting events that we're going to be undertaking and opportunities for you to plug in. We'll get to the conversation with Linda. I'm looking really forward to that. She's got a new book out that we're going to be talking about. And then we'll talk about, again, a few opportunities for folks to get involved, both in our campaign and with the work that she's helping hold together in New York. So thanks again for joining us. I'm looking forward to that. Let's dive in. Let's start with the current events here in San Francisco. There's been an interesting dialogue about how, on the one hand, our city government and our state government have proven, in some respects, very prescient in responding to the coronavirus pandemic. Early adoptions of shelter-in-place orders, early support for social distancing measures, while, unfortunately, and this was the overlooked part of the first wave of this narrative, the Atlantic wrote a story about the first part of this story, and it took a local journalist, Joe Eskenazi at Mission Local, to uncover the rest of the story, the yin, you might say, to the yang, or the dark side of San Francisco's coronavirus response, which has been the unfortunate failure to meet the needs of our unhoused neighbors. And it's not just the case that abandoning their needs in a time of pandemic risks only their health. Risking anyone's health in a time of contagious pandemic places everyone's health at risk. And that's unfortunately what the city officials have done by first proposing to abandon entirely unhoused communities and then proposing to provide emergency housing in a congregate setting. Thankfully, just this week, there's been motion on this. The city the mayor has agreed to move our unhoused neighbors into hotel rooms. I want to particularly shout out here visionary leadership on our Board of Supervisors, the member of our elected Board of Supervisors who represents me in District 5 in San Francisco. His name is Dean Preston. I'm very grateful for his support. I'm very inspired by his leadership and the vision that he's brought to the Board of Supervisors. We see it already influencing the outcomes here in San Francisco. And I just want to invite folks to consider, what does it look like when that kind of leadership, and he's also, for instance, proposed a rent and mortgage freeze and forgiveness, an indefinite moratorium on evictions, these kinds, and also the civil right to representation that's given anybody in San Francisco facing eviction a right to publicly funded counsel. Those kinds of visionary proposals and initiatives, especially in the time of this profound crisis that we're facing, is the difference between a future that respects us and a future that preys on us. And I'm very grateful to be represented on the board by a voice that I can respect and admire and appreciate. And big shout out to Dean for his leadership there. So moving past COVID, I want to talk a little bit about some recent updates from our campaign. One of the things I was really excited about that happened last week, we had a discussion with a local group called the Commonwealth Club, and there were a pair of journalists, Michelle Miao and John Zipperer, who interviewed me, and we spoke for the better part of an hour about a great many things. They asked me some insightful questions about my own story and what brought me to activism and to politics. We talked a lot about the issues that distinguish my campaign from that of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We talked a lot about the theory of change that brings me to politics and the vision that I and others who are already in Washington are aiming to promote. Another interview that happened last week that I was very grateful to have a chance to redo was one with independent journalist Walker Bragman in New York. And he actually interviewed me earlier in the week, and we talked at some length about the pandemic and public policy responses to it, particularly universal health care and paid sick leave as thoughtful public policy responses that, for better or worse, we can't seem to find elected incumbents willing to embrace. And so we had this conversation, and unfortunately, within an hour of our interview concluding, it had been taken down from YouTube. And it was ironic for me, having worked at the Electronic Frontier Foundation on issues including corporate content moderation and the threat that it poses to free speech, to then become, I don't want to say a target of it, because I don't think we were targeted, but that's the danger of decision by algorithm. It didn't take an act of avarice. The arbitrary act of an algorithm was enough to effectively censor a political candidate seeking public office. And one of the sets of things we were discussing, Walker and I, and it's a set of issues that anybody who knows me well knows I care very deeply about, are the set of authoritarian power grabs that have happened under the administrations of both Republicans and Democrats going back for generations. And it's happening again under our feet with respect to COVID. So we talked about this, Walker and I, and then YouTube took the video down. And it's one thing for corporate giants to take speech offline in the abstract. It's another thing when they do it and the people impacted are contesting public office. It's another thing entirely when the corporate giants are taking down content, effectively censoring candidates for public office who are raising issues overlooked by the corporate press. There was a reason many of us were very excited by and inspired by the internet. And part of the point was that people can work around censorship. And here we see the internet, unfortunately, working against itself. Or I should say the corporate internet working against the vision of a free internet that drove many of us to embrace digital rights. So I was grateful for the chance to redo that interview with Walker. We talked about all of the same subjects that we did the first time, as well as corporate content moderation and digital rights. And you can find that online as well. And then I had another interview, I think this was this week, just a few days ago, with Lauren Steiner in Los Angeles. She has a web program by the name of The Robust Opposition. I have some fun stories with Lauren involving Code Pink sponsored trips to foreign countries, where I've learned a lot about how our foreign policy shows up on the ground. And among the things that Lauren and I discussed were obviously the coronavirus pandemic. We talked a lot about the public policy responses, but as we did with Walker, one of the things that she was interested in that I frankly don't think media sources are discussing nearly enough are the civil liberties implications of everything from public health motivated surveillance to Trump's proposal for indefinite and arbitrary detention powers, inverting the right of innocence. It's almost as if, and I can't now remember the name of the student, but there was a really thoughtful student in Professor Ron Haydock's class at San Francisco State. I spoke to their class a few days ago, and he gave me the opportunity to quote him here. There is a danger of being presumed infected until being proven healthy, and how that shows up in everything from your right to trial if detained, and how that might be abused by a politicized administration that knows no respect for the rule of law. These are questions that we need to be discussing, and I was grateful for the chance to talk about those with Lauren as well as Walker. And that leads me to an AMA, an Ask Me Anything session that we did on Reddit over the weekend on the Sanders for President subreddit. And these are always really fun for me because people ask a lot of questions about all kinds of things. And what I'm most motivated by is policy. And we had a lot of policy-related conversations in the AMA. We talked about housing policy. We talked about transit policy and our vision for environmental sustainability and equity. We talked about legislative accountability and how after replacing Nancy Pelosi in the House, I'll remain accountable to my constituents and neighbors. We talked about our strategy in the campaign to win the election in November and put me in that position to need to remain accountable to someone. And we also discussed a particular topic which became increasingly poignant as the week progressed, and that was my chosen preferences among ice cream flavors. And just further reference, for as long as we're on that, Rocky Road is my favorite. I default to strawberry if it's a limited selection. And ice cream became very controversial yesterday, I should say, when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went on a late night television show and shared with the nation and the world her freezer and the way that she's keeping herself occupied during the pandemic. And I'm grateful that she has a warm place to stay, and I'm grateful that she has what seems to be a nice sized kitchen and plenty of room to spread her wings. It was interesting to see a freezer full of boutique ice cream that cost more than what most Americans could contemplate affording. I mean, there were hundreds of dollars worth of ice cream in her freezer, and it did just strike me. I think it's hard not to see an image like that with a public official who is worth, I want to get this right, I want to say 9 figures, who perhaps is less connected to the experiences of working Americans. And I was grateful for the chance just to share what my kitchen looks like, which is very different than Nancy Pelosi's. I like ice cream as much as the next person, but I can't afford ice cream like that. And I don't think many people can. And it's just an interesting reflection on who we each represent and what I aim to represent in Congress, which is not just a set of values and not just a set of principles, but a set of struggles that I think many Americans share. And I know struggle all too well as an immigrant, as someone who's been housing insecure, as somebody who's had to go to night school to get my undergrad degree for the better part of a decade, and then who's fought various civil rights battles across the country. I know what struggle is. It's not alien to me. And I do think it might be alien for some of our career incumbents who haven't necessarily had to endure the challenges of a market economy without a powerful family that has insulated them from the various things that imposes. I think here, this makes me think about Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. I think in a few minutes, I might have an occasion to read a review that Michelle wrote about Linda Sarsour's book, which we'll be discussing. But in Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, she talks about this thesis of effectively lifelong and ultimately intergenerational marginalization through incarceration and its continuing impacts. And, I contrast that with the inverse, which is the silver spoon in one's mouth and the access to political opportunity and privilege afforded to the sons and daughters of powerful political dynasties. And Speaker Pelosi sits atop one, and I have every intention of preventing it from taking root, because I think there's nothing that threatens democracy as much as dynasty, with the possible exception of kleptocracy in Washington. And unfortunately, you can pick your poison because we have our share of both. And so, having droned on about the latest updates, just to recap that, so to try to add some coherence there, we talked about COVID and the response here in San Francisco, ways in which I'm proud of our local officials, and also some ways in which I've been dismayed by their delays in heeding reason, and particularly my support and enthusiasm for my very dear friend, Dean Preston. We talked a little bit about some of the things we've done recently. There was the Commonwealth Club last week, Lauren Steiner, the Reddit AMA. Check out any of those links online. And that brings me to our guest, who I'm looking forward to joining us soon. I think she's just finishing up a media spot on another interview at the moment. But Linda Sarsour is someone who, for me, I have been inspired by a long time. And I'll just share with you the story of how we came to meet. So the era here is the mid 2000s. I think it was 2008 was probably the year we met. And I just moved back to San Francisco after having spent 5 years in Washington. I'd come out to the Bay Area in the early 2000s. I went to law school here. I studied for the bar exam here, was engaged in some activism campaigns here. And then when I started my career as a young lawyer, I went to Washington, D.C., where I first worked for a San Francisco-based law firm. I then joined the first of a series of nonprofits, at the time, the American Constitution Society. And when I came back to San Francisco, I joined a then startup nonprofit called Muslim Advocates. And I was the staff counsel launching their program on racial and religious profiling. And in that context, I had a chance to do a whole bunch of things, principally fighting the FBI, but I was also selected for a Civic Leadership Institute, AMCLI, the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute. And I was grateful through that fellowship to meet a bunch of inspiring people. Linda was one of them. I knew Linda as a firebrand from Brooklyn who was equal parts Palestine, equal part New York, with the you will see when you have a chance to encounter her shortly. Linda is really one of a kind. And the combination of brilliant prescience and insight into the way that the history informs our current moment, as well as, you know, a backbone of steel. You know, so many of us see corporate Democrats waffle at every opportunity and cave when confronted by ideological opposition. Linda is somebody who I am very confident, will never waffle. She's somebody who is so committed to her principles, and I think for the same reasons I am. I mean, we are people who come to our principles through our own individual and our own community's experiences, and it's one reason why I think that history matters so much, and an awareness of our individual roles in history and how we intergenerationally are situated. So I value Linda's perspective on all that very much, and we'll hopefully have a chance to hear it soon. I'll say this, the other thing that struck me about Linda when we first met is that she was someone who, you know, in that group of American Muslim civic leaders were people who identified in various ways and put various different commitments first. And Linda was someone who, like me, put her commitment to equality and equity and revolutionary principles of truth and justice first, before her various identities. And that was true for me as well. This was 2008 when the fellowship had started. This was about 4 years after I'd had an opportunity to represent Mayor Jason West in New Paltz, New York. He was the second mayor in the country to support the right of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice. And this made me somewhat controversial in this group of Muslim civic leaders, because certainly at the time, I think there's been a lot of learning in a lot of different communities since. But at the time, I know many American Muslims were skeptical of marriage equality for LGBTQ couples. And as an advocate who'd fought for that right in the courts, the fellowship gave me a chance to basically have that debate with many other Muslims, explaining to people why marriage equality, whether you're gay or straight, is not just a Muslim civil rights issue, it's a civil rights issue, period. And the essential ingredient in the sauce that unlocks that is intersectionality. As an immigrant who has been challenged for housing, who has struggled to pay for my education, who any number of times has had to forego medical care because I couldn't pay for it. I understand what intersectionality means, not as a set of principles that I read about in a book, though that too in the years since, but as a set of things that I experienced and understood to compound and make a single. This is part of what Michelle talks about in the New Jim Crow, is effectively the intersectionality of criminal justice, poverty, and then its intergenerational aspect. So we'll talk about some of those issues with Linda. And just to close the loop there, Linda also was someone who was very willing to challenge political orthodoxy in the service of justice. And I know her as a truth teller. And in the time since then, she's gone on to do a great many things. I want to share with you a little bit about her bio, and then depending on if she's with us right then, maybe I can tell another story or two about her. So Linda Sarsour is an award-winning civil rights activist, community organizer, and mother of three. She's a Palestinian, Muslim American born, raised in Brooklyn, New York. She's the former executive director of a group, a nonprofit called the Arab American Association of New York. She's also the co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform that's called Empower Change. And she's also a founding member of the Justice League, NYC. That's a leading force of activists and artists, youth, and also formerly incarcerated individuals committed to criminal justice reform through not just policy advocacy, but also direct action. And that combination is one that I respect and admire very much, having been both a policy advocate and a direct action organizer. That inside-outside synergy is one that is appreciated, I think, all too little in Congress. More about Linda. She's also served as the national co-chair of the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. That's the Women's March on Washington. And I believe that was the January of 2017, if I'm not mistaken. She's been named among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. And she was also cited as one of Fortune's 50 greatest leaders. She's been featured as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2017. And she's won numerous awards for her activism, including a Champion of Courage Award from the Obama administration. You'll hear her voice in all kinds of settings on issues that affect Muslim communities, on issues that affect Middle Eastern affairs and criminal justice reform. She also, one context in which I've come to be very fond of her work, she was among the surrogates, the national surrogates for Senator Bernie Sanders in his recently suspended presidential campaign. I hope to have an opportunity to ask her a little bit about her experience on the campaign and her maybe some of her feelings in the last week. I know that's been a challenging thing for many of us to respond to. Linda also has been recognized for her transformative intersectional organizing work and movement building work. I had a chance to hear her most recently at the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America convention, I should say, in Atlanta. I think it was in August 2019. And there is only one person I can think of who brings a house down like Linda Sarsour, and that's Sarah Nelson from the Flight Attendants Union. And each of them gave keynote addresses at different points in the weekend. And, you know, I'm not often speechless, but it's really that one, I can't do justice to the wisdom and the vision and the power of each of their voices. And I'm very excited for you to have a chance to hear from Linda. I'm not sure if she's with us yet. I think she might not yet be. So maybe I'll just share another couple stories about her while we're waiting for her to wrap up her previous interview. Linda and I were on a panel together in Netroots in St. Louis, I believe it was, in maybe I can't remember what year. It had to be around 2014, 2015. It must have been 2015 in the wake of the Ferguson uprising. That's my guess, without frankly being able to grip the year off the top of my head. And, you know, I've seen her in context after the context, whether it's been the NYPD working with the CIA to infiltrate college campuses across the Northeast to monitor Muslim students, and she was outspoken about that. Whether it was the stop and frisk program that was the NYPD shaking down Black and brown youth on the street, she's been outspoken about that. Whether it's Trump's corruption in the context of the Muslim ban, discriminating against visitors from particular countries, she's been outspoken about that. And I admire the fact that Linda has been among the voices in our country that I think has been among just her voice is as clear as a bell. You'll hear you'll see when you hear from her shortly, she doesn't prevaricate. She doesn't pick around the edges. She's not playing this game that you'll hear so many career politicians do, where, you know, they make these seemingly thoughtful compromises. And I understand that there are very important considerations to be weighed in policy. And at the same time, it's very important to enter the policy arena with a set of principles, a set of a vision that grounds us not merely in responding to the latest poll numbers. And that's the unfortunate, that's what our democracy is unfortunately reduced to with corporate representation. And she, as a leader in her community, as a national spokesperson for a movement, and as an organizer of events, including the largest single day protest in US history, she has an important contribution to make to our political culture, and I'm proud to be her friend. Sounds like we might still be waiting for Linda. So no, she's here. Linda is here. Linda, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have you on. I just read your bio for folks. Tell us a little bit first. How are you and your loved ones doing in New York? I know it's really rough out there right
now. Hey, Shahid. I'm in New York. As many people know, I'm in Brooklyn, New York, in the center of this pandemic. It is actually nothing like I've seen before. And as you know, Shahid, I went through like kind of the 9/11 days, and it's just consistent ambulance sirens, consistent helicopters. I live in Southwest Brooklyn, which is called Bay Ridge, and it's actually a neighborhood that they have identified in New York before the pandemic called NORC. So this stands for Naturally Occurring Retirement Community. So a lot of my neighbors are older folks. And so literally there's like an ambulance on my block at least every day. And so it's been hard. And as you know, I'm an organizer, Shahid. So I'm out, like I wake up in the morning, I'm on the street. And so it's been really hard for someone like me who's an actual street organizer and mobilizer to kind of figure out how to be an organizer from the comfort of my home, which is really hard to do. So I'm very excited to be here with you.
I'm glad you're here too. And it's interesting to hear you reflect on that as also a fellow street organizer, having a foot in that world. For me, you're seeing and participating in part of our pivot in the campaign to, a pandemic world where we can't knock on doors and we can't do events. It's one reason I'm grateful for, all the folks who are joining us and for your voice tonight, and other ways to stay connected, even if we can't be physically together. I've been I was talking about your address at the DSA convention and your work as one of Bernie's surrogates just before you joined us. And we'll talk about the book in just a minute. Is there anything that you might care to share with us? Maybe an inspiring story or two from your time with Bernie over the last year? I've seen him do so much for our movement. Is there anything from that experience that you want to leave with folks?
I mean, there's so many stories that I could share with you of inspiration from that campaign. But to be quite honest with you, the inspirational stories don't actually come from Bernie at all. They come from the people that I've met in every corner of this country. And one of the most inspiring stories that I can share is also a historic one. For the first time in American history and really in election history, having mosques become caucus sites in Iowa was just a sight to see our people be engaged and be seen. And for us to actually have the caucuses in the mosque with our community was actually something so beautiful and so inspirational. The organizing that happened in California was monumental. I mean, that field operation, I mean, from the top of the state to the bottom of the state, it was absolutely, some of the most hope that has been instilled in me in a really long time. And that is why I think your race is really important as someone who is in the state of California, and also thinking about the district attorney race in San Francisco and some of the other kind of, these so-called long shots, no one can do this, no one's going to win this. I mean, when Bernie won the state of California, it wasn't like he barely made it. I mean, he crushed it in California. And I know that is something that California is a state, I think, in the campaign that just shows people what's possible, that if you put your mind to it, if you want something to happen, you can make it happen, and especially in a place like California.
I would say that's true about California in context well beyond the election. I think California generally is a place that expands the range of possibility. It's the thing I love so much about living here. And I appreciate that reflection on our race too. I certainly feel that we have a great opportunity for the movement here. And I appreciate you seeing it. Do you have any thoughts that you want to share? And if this is an uncomfortable question, we can pivot away from it, but I'm curious if you have any feelings maybe, or if you want to share with people what the last week was like for you. I know when Bernie announced that he was suspending his campaign, that was a tear-jerking day for me. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of feelings around it, going from the hope of wanting to support his vision to then realizing that whether it's Trump or Biden, if I am successful in liberating the 12th congressional district seat, I'm going to be fighting a right-wing misogynist with a history of racial predation in Washington. And, that's sort of shifting the context of what I'm up to now. How was it for you to, what was your arc of feelings and emotions over that last week when you learned?
To be honest, I saw it coming. So I wasn't like too surprised by it. And it was sad for me. And it was more sad because I knew a lot of movement folks in the Bernie movement, the Not Me Us movement, were going to be sad. So I was kind of more sad for them. I was sad for a lot of the young people that we have mentored and trained. in states across the country, young people that were so passionate, like they believed in this and from such a deep place, but they were also doing the work. I was sad for the young people who started seeing Biden win states that he never even stepped foot in. And we had young people phone banking for hours. We had young people, I swear to God, Shahid, in Iowa, it was so cold that my bones were cold. Like it was a kind of cold that I've never felt in my life, even as a New Yorker. And there were young kids knocking on doors. Some of them didn't even have gloves on. And they were like hot blooded. They were so hot for the movement that they didn't care how cold it was outside. Like I was the lady that was like, wear your hat. Why are you not wearing gloves? Zip up your jacket. And, then comes, we win the first states, as New Hampshire, we win Iowa, we win Nevada. And then all of a sudden, we see we know the establishment Dems start synchronizing and start doing what they do, which we knew we knew this was going to be an uphill battle. I knew this was going to be an uphill battle from day one, and watched that all go down. And I just saw it. I just knew what was going to happen. But then when Biden started winning states, especially states he spent no money in or didn't organize in, I wasn't sad for Bernie. I was sad for those young people, the ones that put their heart and soul into this movement, people that did the work, the ones that in between classes they were phone banking, people that would go knock doors if they had a 3-hour break as college students. And those are the people that I was sad for in the last week. But you know what else I told myself, Shahid, you know this, I've known you now for over 13 years. I'm like, listen, I wasn't in this because I was like inspired by an old white man. I was in this because that old white man was going to be our vehicle for leftist progressive policies that through the venue and platform that this old white man named Bernie gave us, that he gifted us, that he was willing to put himself on the line. I mean, Bernie was hustling in a way that I haven't even seen young people hustle. I mean, the guy was, as you saw him, he was running from rally to rally, from town hall to meeting to this and that.
Relentless.
And relentless, like he is, like literally like the Energizer Bunny. And what made me not sad is that everything that we set out to do in this campaign, that we set out to do in the last 4 or 5 years since the first run from Bernie Sanders, we did, Shahid. People are talking about Medicare for all in a way that we've never seen before. We have Medicare for all bills that are on the table. We're talking about cancellation of student debt. We're talking about, environmental justice policy, not in a shallow sense, but really getting to the deep and the core, and looking at environmental justice also as a racial justice issue. We're talking about U.S. foreign policy in a way that we've never talked about, in an anti-imperialist and anti-interventionist way that we haven't seen, at least never in my lifetime, until Bernie came along. Having someone like Bernie talk about Central and South America in ways that are nuanced, being able to talk about things, that only we were talking about in very small elements and fringes of the leftist movement, now became at the top of the echelons of the Democratic Party. And so for me, I'm like, well, I don't know about y'all, why you're sad. We're winners over here. And what that does for us is that we may not have gone to the White House, but we have gotten folks like you running for office across this country, people running for state legislators, running for Congress across this country. We got the Rashidas and the Ilhans of the world and the AOCs of the world. I'm still excited about that. I know other young people just like you who are running in places like Ihsan Lecky, who has progressive left policies running in Massachusetts, running also for Congress, and so I'm excited about those folks. That's where my energy is, you're mad about the White House. Don't wake up every 4 years and be mad about the White House. What are you doing in between those years, building power and electing those who align with our principles and values? So I'm still excited.
Speak it, sister. Yes. I tried to characterize your voice a little bit before you joined us for people, just like the vision and the clarity. And yeah, I love hearing you speak. And maybe just to chime back, feedback on 2 different points of that. When you were talking about feeling, disappointed for the young people in terms of the work they'd put in and how they were internalizing this moment. One of the communities that I was reflecting on in the last week is the international community, which, doesn't have any chance to influence elections. But because of our international footprint, and particularly our Defense Department, they have to deal with the outcomes of our elections, and thinking about it through the lens, not just of the international community, but the future international community through the climate justice lens, and understanding that Joe Biden, for better or worse, does not offer the change that our species so desperately needs. Thinking of this moment in that dimension for me was particularly disappointing. But, where you came to it is, I particularly appreciate that, because at the end of the day, for me, I don't so much relate to this entirely as an observer. And this is a good segue to the book, frankly, because we, writ large, are not here to be bystanders. It's the title of Linda's book. And I, reacting to and responding to and internalizing and feeling and getting over the first wave of my feelings surrounding Bernie's suspension of his campaign. Also, in some respects, I don't have the luxury of watching. I'm an actor in an ecosystem. And so if anything, it does shift the context. It makes the likely set of outcomes much darker for me, in the sense of having to fight one of two tyrants instead of supporting somebody that I'm very inspired by. Though he'll still be on the Hill, and we'll still be fighting for those visions. The other thing that it really shifted for me was this idea of doubling down. Like the chips are down, climate chaos is happening. There's a pandemic raging. We have very clear alternatives before us. And for me, as somebody running against an icon of the corporate establishment, it redoubled my resolve. And I hear that also in your call to action, which I appreciate. Let's talk about the book. Can you tell us first what got you thinking about writing it? And then we'll get into some of the themes that you develop. What was your process creatively in coming to the book's fruition?
I'm definitely going to get to that, but I wanted to reflect on something that you said. One of the necessities or requirements of a strong movement, of a powerful movement, is agility and flexibility and being able to pivot really quickly. And I'm with you. I'm absolutely not inspired in any way, shape, or form, which is why I'm telling those young people who felt like, was it even worth the work that I did, to pivot locally and to support local candidates. Whether you have a Donald Trump in the office or getting someone like Joe Biden, who has a history of interventionist foreign policy and is not obviously aligned with us, a person who voted for the war in Iraq, et cetera. The pivot for me has always been, when I thought about Biden, or the potential of Biden becoming the presumptive nominee, is, who do you want your opponent in the White House to be? And that's how I'm thinking about this election. And I want young people to think about it in that way. Like you said, we're in climate chaos right now. We have babies in cages that may never be reunified with their families. We have Palestinians who are counting on us. We have Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps counting on us. We have people all over the world, in South America, Central America, all over the world, who are counting on us to do the right thing. And that is going to require us building the bench in Congress. And it's forcing us to figure out how we're going to win back that Senate and put someone like Biden in a place where he's going to be held accountable. And so what we did in the past, Shahid, and what makes me fearful of this upcoming election, is the exciting part is getting more progressives in office, right? And pivoting all of our work on local politics, which is what I'm going to do, which by default helps us win back the White House anyway. Because if we're getting excitement around progressive candidates, around people who align with our values, and we're getting people excited, they get to the polls, I presume, and I've seen this, from 20 years of doing electoral politics, it just goes down the line. I mean, once you get people excited about one candidate, they know when they get to the polls, they're just going to go down the line. So I'm expecting that that's what's going to happen, which is why we're pivoting locally. Mm-hmm. But what I'm also observing right now, which is why this is important, is when President Obama went office, and you remember this, Shahid, we were actually, 2008 was the year that you and I were like in this fellowship together. And it was, it was a historic moment. We elected the first Black president. We're all excited. He's an organizer from the South Side of Chicago. He's a constitutional lawyer. And we were like, what is this, a dream come true? Like, what happened here? Like, how did we go from George Bush to Barack Obama? And then we end up being under an Obama administration, where what really happened, and I'm actually going to say something that could be controversial to leftists, is that did Obama do things that folks like Shahid were fighting against? The like unwarranted surveillance, the Patriot Acts. I mean, we could sit here for days and name the drones and the wars and the this and the that. Yeah. But the real question is the blame on Obama, or is the blame on our movements? What happened when Obama got elected is a lot of people just sat back. A lot of people were like, look, he got this.
Yep.
Yeah. And what we didn't do for Barack Obama is we did not build the political will for him to feel like, I got to start doing the right thing because I got people out here that are holding me accountable to it. And who he ends up being accountable to is the billionaires and the lobbyists and all the other influential elements of politics. And then the quote people, us, overall, maybe not Shahed and I, but majority of our movement that we see now is not around at that time.
That's right.
I think one of the most consistent elements of the movement under the Obama administration were the undocumented young people who forced Obama to at least get to the point where he put forth programs like DACA, et cetera. We're still doing civil, because I can't even remember mass scale civil disobedience or mass mobilizations in the way in which we've seen, at least in the last few years. So anyway, all I'm saying is that for folks that are still kind of uninspired by a Biden administration, pivot locally, get your candidate. If you're a Californian and you're watching Shahed, support Shahed, make sure Shahed gets to Congress. And then when whoever gets nominated or whoever wins the election in 2020 and goes to the White House, just make the intention and the commitment that you're going to be there the first day, because I'm going to protest whoever's in the White House the first day they get in there, just like I did for Donald Trump. And that's the kind of commitment that I hope people are engaging in. Back to my book, which is connected. So this book is called We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. And it's really a book of my journey for almost 20 years, organizing, not only in the Muslim American community, but organizing as a racial justice, civil rights activist in this country. This book is a lot about intersectionality, not in the ways in which you've seen white women try to explain it, but really intersectionality in the implementation of organizing across oppression. Understanding that you can't combat anti-Black racism without also combating xenophobia and homophobia, and working on issues of economic justice, but also racial justice and climate justice and reproductive rights. Like all of these issues are connected. And if we're not organizing in that way, then we're going to keep losing, as we have continued to lose on many fronts, but also winning on some fronts. This book took me about 2.5 years to write. I'm not an author. It's not what I do. I didn't feel like I had time to write a book, but a young woman encouraged me. She's a book agent, a literary agent, who said to me, listen, here we hear all the stuff about surveillance of mosques, during the 2016 election. We talked about the Muslim registry program, and everyone was like, oh, I'll register. I'm going to register as a Muslim after the Trump administration goes in. And as Shahed knows very well, it really had me reflecting on the almost 15 years we had lived as a Muslim American community in a post 9/11 America, where we already know what a registry program looks like. I know exactly what it looks like. I also know what it means to be under surveillance, not as an individual, as a leader of a nonprofit organization, and as a member of a Muslim American community in New York City. And so a lot of the things that people were so outraged by after the inauguration of the Trump administration are things that we have experienced as Muslim Americans, as children of immigrants, as undocumented people, as Black people, some for centuries and others for decades in this country. And so that's what my book is about. My book is about taking you on a journey. Some of the moments I share in my book will be things that you will all remember. Everybody remembers where they were on 9/11, how you felt that day, what are the thoughts that you had through your mind. So I'm hoping that this gives you a glimpse of where Muslims were, where we were, where was I as a New Yorker, as a college student at the time. I also share a lot about winning in this book. Oftentimes, people expected me to write a book about how I'm some sort of victim of hate in America. I'm not. This is a book of survival. I'm a survivor of hate and Islamophobia. I'm a survival of police states. I'm a survivor of surveillance, of all kinds of policies that many people fight against right now. So you won't find a lot of stories in the book that are about, me trying to paint myself or my community as victims. This is more of a book about a community that I'm introducing you to, that is part of a long history of different communities at different times who have felt the pressure and the power of government who target people as scapegoat communities, and really how people have navigated that. How have I been able to navigate that as an organizer? And so that's what this book is about. And what I hope you get from this book is very simple. There's nothing extraordinary about me. There's really nothing extraordinary about Shahed, except that he's a lot of things that I'm not, like a hip hop artist, and that he's like really brilliant and smart. I remember like 13 years ago, I said to Shahed at a meeting, I said, listen, bro, like you are too smart for me. You're going to have to tone down that vocabulary just a little bit.
I get that about every 10 minutes. Yeah,
my New York public school education didn't take me as high up as that. But anyway, no. But there's in the sense that what I was really trying to get at in my book is that what I mean to say when I say that I'm not extraordinary and that Shahed's not extraordinary is that we are people just like you. And we have made decisions in our lives to say we're not going to sit back and allow bad things to happen to our neighbors, to people that we love, you know, that we are people who oftentimes have stories that align with yours. You know, you may be a child of immigrants, you know, you may be a part of a poor working class community or family. You may have went to public school your whole life. You know, whatever different elements, there are going to be moments in this story where you're going to say, wow, like I'm feeling Linda on a different level. Like I know more about her now. I know more about her community, and now I feel an alignment to her. And in hopes that you also not only feel alignment with me, but say, wait a minute, if I could do that, like I could go knock on my neighbor's door. Wait a minute, Linda was trying to be a high school English teacher, and all of a sudden she's an organizer. How did that happen? I could do that. And so I hope that this is more like a rallying cry, but it's an invitation to people to say, we're not around. I don't believe that any of us are supposed to just be sitting around and going to work and coming home, passing by homeless people in our community, knowing that our neighbor down the street is from Ecuador and she's about to be separated from her children, or we heard about a young Black man in our community who was killed by the police, and we're supposed to just be like, that's just life. That's just how the world's supposed to be. That's actually the opposite of who I think we are all supposed to be, which is the whole story of the book. The one also thing that I hope inspires you about the book is that the foreword is written by Harry Belafonte. And for many of you who don't know who Harry Belafonte is, he's one of my mentors, and he's an icon, a civil rights leader, an entertainer, a songwriter. He was one of the confidants to Dr. Martin Luther King. He was also one of the financiers of the civil rights movement, put a lot of his money on ensuring that that civil rights leaders at the time had the resources for their children to go to school, to pay their mortgages and things like that, so people didn't have the stress of the financial strains that it takes on activists like us who have to sacrifice having, you know, cushy jobs so that we can do this kind of work. And so Mr. Belafonte shares some really inspiring words in this book that I know will move a lot of you. And part of it is sad, and part of it is a vision for the future. You know, Mr. Belafonte just celebrated his 93rd birthday.
Wow, that's
yeah, he's still out there kicking. But he says in the book that he knows he's not going to make it to the promised land. You know, that promised land that Dr. King talked about. And he knows that he's not going to make it there. But he knows that we will. And he believes in our generation. He says about us that we are getting it right, that we are starting to see how our liberation is bound up with one another, and that we're a bold generation, truth-telling generation. And I hope that all of you feel like this is the moment where telling the truth is going to save our people, where supporting truth tellers is going to save our people and get us closer to where we want to be. So that's my book. Some of the people that loved my book, just to give you a little encouragement, are Michelle Alexander, who many of you know is the author of the New Jim Crow and is writing another book right now that should be coming out soon. She gave me a great review for my book in the back. Gloria Steinem, who many of you know is a feminist and has been around for a really long time, supporter of Palestinian rights, Jewish American. Patrice Kahn-Cullors, who's a Californian, as you know, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and wrote her own book called When They Called You a Terrorist. So I've had great reviews from Kirkis. But one last funny story that I'll share with you about my book is about 5 days ago, I'm sitting at home like everybody else. And I'm like, I woke up in the morning. I'm like, why is everybody hating me today? What did I do? And then, because I've been pretty well behaved in quarantine, actually. Okay. And I'm actually working on the adaptation of my book for young readers. And so I've been really well behaved. I come out on Twitter every once in a while, but not really too spicy. Okay. But I was getting a lot of hate. And I was like, this is crazy. What's the new thing that happened? Turns out that the Washington Post section where they review books reviewed my book. Okay. And they said that book was amazing.
Nice.
And not because it's my book, but it really is a good book. I'm like serious. You know, I would critique my own book if it wasn't. And turns out that a guy who's a big Donald Trump supporter was not very happy that the Washington Post thought my book was great. And all of a sudden, the president of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, retweets this one of his supporters who was outraged at the Washington Post. And the guy had my photo where he photoshopped it from the actual Washington Post piece with the name of the review, which was something about like fearless in the face of hate. And it had like my face. And the president, who has 76 million followers, retweets this. And I'm just like, that's all I need. Bro, you don't even read books. Like, why are you so mad about my book right now? There are literally people dying in our country in a global pandemic. We're literally surpassed almost every other country. And our president has time to find a tweet from some rando who's mad that the Washington Post thought my book was good. So if you needed any other reason to get my book, it should be out of spite for Donald Trump. And also because it will inspire you, and hopefully it'll also get you to support Shahid.
I certainly would recommend that people lean into the inspiration, though, you know, spiting the president is as good a reason as any other to get it. Tell people where they can buy it. Is some I'm trying not to send people to a particular online site that sells everything that is killing our economy.
So I recommend that you get this book from 2 places. One is IndieBound, and then the other one is Bookshop. Bookshop is actually raising money for independent bookstores. As you all know, through this pandemic, there's a lot of our beloved bookstore coffee shops are struggling. And this is a way for you to support them. So not just my book, but any book. Hopefully you're all reading and reading books from people of color, immigrant writers, LGBTQIA writers. There's so many great books out there in the world. Maybe Shahid could, through his campaign site, probably recommend some great books for you to all read from our friends. And Bookshop, again, is donating money back to different independent bookstores. Believe it or not, Uncle Bobby's, which is run by Mark Lamont Hill, even though they're also closed down, but they're also, believe it or not, they're have an operation where they're doing like, you know, online sales. So I would recommend supporting them, even though they're in Philly, they're mailing across the country. And then worst case scenario, barnesandnoble.com, because you can get the book there.
Right on. Another story I want to get into, just if I can ask you this before you leave, before you joined, I was sharing a story about how within the community of Muslim civic leaders among whom we met, that there was I saw in you a unique willingness to put principle before identity, to challenge norms, not from the position of a member of a marginalized community, but as someone demanding that we live up to our own words, you know, more as an American, frankly, than as a Muslim. And which it seemed to me encouraged a certain boldness in your part that I've resonate with and appreciate. Can you share any guidance to, and I'm thinking now about young people or otherwise, but folks who might feel iconoclastic relative to their communities, people who have concerns that maybe align with yours or mine or Bernie's or somebody's in our movements, but feels like their own, you know, workplace or family or friend group or community, however they construe it, is not there yet. What are the either the stories or the words or the inspirations that you might share with that person to demonstrate the leadership to challenge a seeming consensus, to stand up for a set of principles? I almost feel like everything starts there. Is there anything that you would share to somebody in that space who might be tuning in?
I first want to say that, you know, speaking truth, working from a place of principles and not negotiating our principles and values is not easy. And if it was easy, Shahid, everybody would be doing it. And unfortunately, not everybody's doing it. And it's actually a small minority of people who do it, because it comes with consequences. But it also comes with freedom and liberation. One of the things I always tell people is that, you know, I'm not fully free, but I'm pretty free. And what I mean by that particularly is my mind is free. I don't conform to the ways in which society tells us to show up. And you know this in our Muslim American community, there's a lot of like, flag waving, and there's a lot about like, I'm so proud to be an American, but from a different context. I'm proud to be an American because I believe that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. And when people tell you, oh, don't do this and don't say that because you're not going to get anywhere in life, I'm a great example of you can get places and get high places if you focus, if you organize, and if you invest in relationships with people. And so for me, organizing way before there was ever a Women's March, these mobilizations that I was able to put together, the organizing I've done in New York City, the campaigns that I've been able to win around the country, around policy issues that I deeply care about and believe in, no one can take that away from me. You can't take my relationships away. You can't take the people who are aligned with my values and principles from me. That's just not going to happen. And so, when I went to the Women's March, you can't take what I did at the Women's March away from me. You can vilify me. You can say what you need to say, but I know who I am. And I think one of the most important things that I tell people all the time is like, don't allow others to define you. Know who you are. And I also don't want people to be like, oh yeah, I know Linda's that Muslim lady, right? Like I am an organizer. I am a freedom fighter. I happen to be a Muslim. I happen to be. Shahid's running for Congress, happens to be a Muslim, happens to be. And that's the other thing also about this work, not allowing people to tokenize us And one of the things I always say, Shahid, is that, everyone comes from a community where we have diversity within the communities we come from. I don't speak for every Muslim. I'm one Muslim. I hope that majority of Muslims align with my values and my principles. But that's the work that I have to do, organizing and having the conversations in my community. So for me, it's about, I've embraced every part of who I am. I am unapologetic about every part of who I am. And I've been able to take that to the front covers of Cosmopolitan magazine, to Glamour magazine. I've been Times 100. I've been on the cover of Essence magazine. I mean, I've been on places where people told me, if you stay Palestinian, if you're too Palestinian, Linda, if you're out here talking about one state solutions, you're never getting anywhere in life. And I've been on, MSNBC, CNN commentating. I wrote a book. I was signed by Simon & Schuster. I mean, Simon & Schuster is one of the largest publishers in the world. And so I tell people, don't listen to everybody else. Don't let people confine you to a particular box telling you who to be and how to be and when to be it. Be all of you and maintain your convictions and your values. And I promise you that doors will open, because times have changed. We have evolved. And Bernie was a great example of that. The fact that a person like Bernie could run for president and get as far as he got is not because of Bernie Sanders, it's because of us.
Yes. And he said it every time he got a chance. That's right.
Our movements built the political environment for a socialist. But, if democratic socialist makes you feel better, then that's cool. For a democratic socialist to run and almost snatch the nomination, that just shows you how far we've gotten. And I know that if we stay focused, the times will come when we will have full-fledged people who are going to be sitting in elected office, who are in fact going to remember that they work for me. And that's another thing also, Shahid, about me. The way that my mind frames things differently. When I think about like a Nancy Pelosi, or I think about a Chuck Schumer, or I think about anybody, a Barack Obama or a Trump or whatever, or a city council member, it doesn't matter. My mind tells me those people work for me. So the way that I operate is I'm the employer.
Well, that's what a democracy means.
Yeah. And so my thing is like, I don't care who these people are and how powerful you think they are or not powerful. If we, the people, are not impressed with the ways in which our elected officials are either doing or not doing their job, I know that in New York City, I can organize my people and we could defeat these people and put other people in place. And I'll give you a great example in New York City. I live in a district, and you know this from New York, I live in a district that was at one point, we had the only Republican in the entire New York City delegation that went to Congress. Okay. And for many years, I had a Republican senator, who like a state legislator senator, who was what they called the godfather of the state Senate. I had a Republican assemblywoman. I mean, it was a hot mess. And in one election year, our community got up and said, you know what, we're going to organize. And in one election cycle, we took out our state senator, and we took out our Republican member of Congress, who was the man that wouldn't indict the killer of Eric Garner. And so that's what happens when you, and if you remember, in New York State, we had something that they called the IDC. Yeah. It stands for the Independent Democratic Coalition. Basically what that really translates to is Democrats really they were Republicans masquerading as Democrats. What they did was they caucused with Republicans. So we never had a majority in the Senate.
They were kind of like Nancy Pelosi or the Blue Dogs.
Basically. And what ended up happening in one election cycle, literally one election cycle, 2018, there were 6 members of the Independent Democratic Coalition, 6 members of the IDC. Guess what happened? All of them got defeated. We got Alexandra Biaggi. We got young people of color. It was amazing. It was the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. So my point is that that's what it looks like when you organize with principles and values, that it can't just be ideological or theoretical in the ways that you think about things. Your ideology and your convictions have to also equal action.
Yes.
When we build power and action aligned with our ideology, guess what happens? We win.
When we organize, we win. Yes, absolutely. So good to connect with you, sister. Thank you so much for bringing your views here tonight. You're putting your perspectives in a book. I can't wait to read it. among the things I'm regretful for with the pandemic. I know at one point you were planning to come out here and do a book talk, and I was looking forward to getting a signed copy, and I will try to.
We'll definitely get one of those.
All right.
I also need you to not worry about reading my book, because I need you to figure out how you're getting to Congress.
We'll do that first. And there'll be plenty of time on planes back and forth when the pandemic lifts after I'm in office. But thank you for joining us tonight. Are there any upcoming projects that you want to plug, or action opportunities for people to pursue specific campaigns you might be working on?
I think right now, this particular moment, there's two things that I would love for people to do. Well, actually three things. One, if you're not already supporting Shahid, you better be supporting Shahid, because we need him, and we really need him desperately, especially in these times. So if that means if you're making calls for him, dropping him another $20, another $100, because our opposition got a lot of money. So that's one thing. The second thing is, as you know, there's a national campaign calling on vote by mail. I hope that you all join that call, that you're calling your members of Congress to support vote by mail. And in conjunction with that, as you know, the United States Postal Service right now is on the verge of going bankrupt because of this pandemic. And while our government has apparently bailouts for corporations and for airlines, they don't seem to have any extra money laying around to help the United States Postal Service, which, as you know, employs about 500,000 people. And so I'm asking people to also call your members of Congress to save the United States Postal Service. And something really simple that you can do, believe it or not, is if only half of the American population just bought a book of stamps, that could really help fill the gaps of funding for the United States Postal Service. And they have great stamps right now. And I just bought like 2 books yesterday. And just to give you the reason why I say in conjunction that the vote by mail in the United States Postal Service is because Donald Trump doesn't want to give the United States Postal Service the bailout, because he doesn't actually support vote by mail. And so that's just another voter suppression tactic. And so, understanding that you can, for 55 cents, you can mail a letter from New York to California is important for working class people, for seniors and others. And of course, for those who are going to engage in vote by mail. And so that's why we have to save the United States Postal Service. So I hope that you guys do that. And the last thing is I'm working on another campaign right now called End COVID-19 Sanctions. We're calling on the US government right now to temporarily lift sanctions on Iran. Iran is being ravaged by this pandemic, and our cruelty and sanctions on the people of Iran, who should not be punished for whatever disagreements we have with their government, if by calling Mnuchin, which is the U.S. Treasury Department, and asking them to temporarily lift sanctions. We've already have members of Congress who are supporting this call, including the champions, as you all know them, Ilhan, Rashida, and AOC, and many, and Pramila and others. And so if you can join the call and ask your member of Congress to also please call on the U.S. Treasury Department to lift temporary lift sanctions on Iran.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Linda, for coming. Keep up the great work. Keep seeking truth to power. Stay healthy. We're going to need you. And thanks for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. So I want to thank Linda again for joining us. I'm going to welcome on with me in just a minute. My colleague Emily is going to share some updates from the campaign about some ways that anybody can plug in. Here's Emily Jones.
Hello, everybody. What an exciting story. One election cycle can change things so dramatically. And as Bernie always insisted, we can only strengthen our movement by helping our local candidates on the progressive slate. So this means you join phone banks, you knock on doors after the lockdown, you amplify our messages on social media. And currently we have hundreds of active volunteers in our ecosystem. If you want to join the movement, sign up at shahid.fyi/volunteer. So Shahid, as you know, he has national and local endorsements that mean a lot to us. So we are again taking the time to say how grateful we are to members of SF Bernie Kratz and the League of Pissed Off Voters and the innumerable local leaders and national leaders who have helped Shahid make it to the November ballot. We are also excited to tell you that we are trying to match this giant machine that Nancy Pelosi has behind her. It is not easy. It is an uphill battle. Right now, we are beta testing our giant distributed phone banking system. This will help us to ID San Francisco voters at a time when we cannot go door to door. So once more, it's shahid.fyi/volunteer. Once you sign up, we will add you to our online chat room. And in the next weeks, as we roll out this distributed phone banking, you will get access to our dialogue, to the scripts and training to organize your friends to also join the effort. And as finance director, I must request that you consider a monthly donation. And the site for that is shahid.fyi/win/live. You will also be helping to create jobs for bright young leaders that we are bringing in. We have part-time roles we are hiring for. So see you next week, 5 p.m. on Wednesdays. Please add it to your calendar.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate your support. Have a great week. Keep speaking truth to power.
No importa de dónde vengas, gózala como quieras. Baila la salsa, bailala a tu manera. Te entra por los pies, te sale por la azotea. Se la gozan como quiera, baila la salsa. Donde quiera, baila a tu manera, bailemos toditos juntos, no se quede nadie afuera, baila a tu manera, baila a tu manera, baila a tu manera, baila a tu manera.
Holding my breath way too long, it's overflow. We are missing the whole point, we're doing great. We're getting closer, so much closer to what we feel. We need substantial attitude, can't hesitate. If this is good, then I'm staying. If this is bad, then let me be. If this is good, then I'm obeying. If this is bad, it is a thing I can't retrieve. Can't hold back love. No. Won't hold back, baby. I just can't. I can't hold back. Can't hold back love. I won't hold back, baby. I won't be holding back, no. I am burning inside, and at night I won't be sleeping. I know you are at your place and wide awake. I know you feel me, I can see you in the shadows. I know that I belong to you, there's no debate. If this is good, then I'm staying. If this is bad, then let me be. If this is good, then I'm obeying. If this is bad, it is a thing I can't retrieve. Can't hold back love. No. Won't hold back, baby. I'm scared. I can't hold back. Can't hold back love. I won't hold back, baby. Can't try. I won't be holding back, no. I won't be holding back, no. Baby, listen. I need to get it out. I've been holding my breath way too long.
Senator, welcome to our microphone. Is there anything of yours that we can keep as a memento of this visit? Take California.
In 2020, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi faces a challenger of her own.
Shahid Buttar announced his plans to challenge Pelosi on privacy issues, environmental justice, and the housing crisis.
Not only does he support Medicare for all, but he also wants to cut military spending.
He understands average, everyday people.
We need a representative that really represents San Francisco's values.